Có gì trong đó?
30 phút nữa đóng cửa.
Cái này là cái gì? Cinema House Screen. Chỉnh chiếu hả? Chỉnh chiếu Sydney đúng không? Opera đúng không?
Dạ đúng rồi.
11 giờ. Chỉnh chiếu cái gì đây? Đây là lịch chỉnh chiếu của người ta đấy hả?
Đúng rồi, 3 giờ kìa, giờ 4 giờ mất tiêu rồi. Còn có nửa tiếng thôi, đi lẹ đi.
3 giờ đâu?
Kìa,
Chỉnh
11 giờ sáng, 1 giờ chiều, 3 giờ chiều.
Chỉnh chiếu cái gì ở đây?
Cinema House on Screen có nghĩa là nó sẽ nói về sự hình thành của Sydney đó, Sydney Opera House.
Đi. Còn một tiếng nữa cơ mà.
Còn đâu? Con tàu đầu tiên.
Con tàu đầu tiên à?
Dạ, mô phỏng lại.
Ừ. Đọc dịch đi. Tàu cổ, tàu gỗ. Cứ đi đi. Cứ đi đi mới quay. Đúng mà đi 2 tầng thôi nhé. Ôi cái xương xít tùm lum.
People on board are ordered to remain there until dawn. They've travelled for nearly 8 months from England to this unknown land. Around the harbour, the first Australians light fires, and they yell from their canoes for these apparitions to go away.
They thought they was the devil when they landed first. They did not know what to make of them. When they saw them going up the mast, they thought they was possums. Marut, Gunnegal people.
At first light, the order is given for the convict men and women to disembark.
And for Aboriginal people, can you imagine? Suddenly there are 11 ships of these strange people wearing clothes, funny hats, they have guns. What are these people up to? Why are they here? How long are they going to stay? Why do they come to my country? Why don't they go somewhere else? Are they spirits? Very strange.
Thổ dân lại sống ở đây rồi nhưng mà
There's this very curious and
Nước
really
nước thổ
touching
dân chứ mà.
có ngày hộ dân có chứ,
attempt to come together and to comprehend.
nhưng mà bây giờ làm sao để kết
So
nối
you
được
have these
người,
extraordinary scenes within 2 or 3 days of landing
tất cả sống
of
tất cả.
Britishers and Aborigines dancing together.
29th January 1788. They pointed with their sticks to the boat landing place and met us in the most cheerful manner. Shouting and dancing, these people mixed with ours, and all hands danced together. William
Nhảy
Grant,
hát múa lửa với nhau.
First Lieutenant.
And all we've got to go on are the paintings done by a young naval lieutenant called
Cái
Bradley.
bức tranh này
And he has these enchanting paintings of redcoats and Aboriginal men indeed dancing together. They're hand in hand. They seem to be
mấy cái
dancing.
người nam nhảy múa với nhau, tay trong tay,
A sort of
một số
playground encounter, if you like, when you're trying to check each other out.
The first Australians can't work out if these visitors are men or women, as their clothing covers them like a strange skin. Finally, an officer is challenged to submit to the country's very first immigration procedure.
He has a wig-haired leotards on. They ask him to take his pants off, which he declined and made a sailor do it.
Arthur Phillip, captain of the First Fleet,
Không
leads
phải
the
là
newcomers
vẽ
ashore.
nào.
After an unremarkable career of 30 years in the Navy, he is dragged from retirement and appointed governor of a place nearly 60 times the size of England.
Governor Phillip was in a rather unique situation when he came to Sydney because he had one of his front teeth missing, and it was the same tooth that was knocked out during the male initiation ceremony.
On my showing them that I lacked a front tooth, it occasioned a general clamour, and I thought gave me some little merit in their opinion. Arthur Phillip, Governor.
nhà thơ.
The local people would have thought, here is a man who's initiated, here is an elder, a senior person, so this is somebody we can negotiate with, this is somebody we can talk to, because he has shared at least one of our ceremonies, he's missing his front tooth.
Bennelong, in his early 20s, also carries the mark of a man. He has passed through the sacred initiation ceremonies, which complete his formal training. He's married and lives in Mongol territory, where he dines on oysters and crayfish, and sleeps under the stars on one of the most spectacular beaches in the world. Where everywhere, the spirit of Miami can be felt, in the wind, and his voice can be heard as thunder, as Miami moves across the sky. Philip has spent a year in London preparing for the journey, and like Noah, he gathers together humans, animals, and supplies. There are 44 sheep, 4 cows, 1 bull, his own greyhounds, tents, farming equipment, wine and seeds. Philip has also taken on board 700 hatchets, 74,000 nails, 50 pickaxes and 700 clamp knives. All this he takes to win over the first Australians, according to his instructions. These instructions also direct Philip to occupy the land of the first Australians, which they now see as British territory.
Instructions for our well-beloved Arthur Phillip, Esquire, Governor of New South Wales. You are to endeavour, by every possible means, to open an intercourse with the natives and to conciliate their affections, enjoining all our subjects to live in amity and kindness with them. Lord Sydney, Secretary for the Home Department.
The Home Office was rather good at issuing orders controlling the interactions of the British with any natives they encountered. They put a great deal of time and thought into it, and most of them were absolutely utopian. On the ground, it wasn't like that.
The justification for taking the land was that Aboriginal people were animals, and to engage with people on an individual basis and to acknowledge the history of those people meant that they were people.
What they wanted was to set up a Britishness here that was for Britons, and that's exactly what drove them to do the things they did.
Immediately he orders trees be chopped down and the land to be cleared. They erect tents, an area for the convict women separate from the men, a blacksmith, the hospital, and a store. Invisible to Philip are the clearly defined territories of the Sydney clans. On the North Shore are the Barrogagal and Gumaragal lands, and on the south, the Birrabirragal, the Gadigal, and Bennelong's people, the Wongal.
All men are equal. These ideas were there, sitting there, and Britain went off and said, no, these people are inferior, we're going to own this land. That assumption was inhumane.
They did incomprehensible things, and they treated each other with vile cruelty.
The first Australians are quickly learning about this military society from a distance. They realise that the men wearing red are armed and are to be avoided.
Aboriginal people watching must have been horrified. Within the space of a week or so, there were 1,100 people in their country, and they would have been outnumbered.
Before Philip can conciliate the affections of the natives, in 1789, disaster strikes.
An extraordinary calamity was now observed among the natives. Repeated accounts brought by our boats of finding bodies of the Indians in all the coves and inlets of the harbour. Pustules, similar to those occasioned by smallpox, were thickly spread on the bodies. But how a disease could have once have introduced itself and then spread so widely seemed inexplicable. What contagion?
How did it come to Australia? I think there's such a debate and there's such speculation that we can't know definitively, but in my own mind it's clear that it came with the first fleet.
It's sometimes said, more often believed, that the smallpox was let loose by the British at that point in time to destroy the possibility of Aboriginal resistance. I simply can't comprehend that notion at all. In all the accounts, there is bewilderment, despair, horror in the British accounts as they see that smallpox is loose among the native population.
The excavations in the rocks were filled with putrid bodies who had fallen victims to the disorder. Not a living person was anywhere to be met with. It seems as if flying from the contagion, they had left the dead to bury the dead. He lifted up his hands and eyes in silent agony for some time. At last he exclaimed, "All dead, all dead," and then hung his head in mournful silence. David Collins, Judge Advocate.
None of the whites are affected by it, as they are immune to it.
England were masters, and the first masters of germ warfare. They already released it through India. They tried it in the Americas. They released it in the West Indies. And they brought it here.
Some say it came from the north of the continent, brought by Macassan fishermen and arrived coincidentally just after the British. Whatever the source, it wipes out the great majority of the first Australians in the Sydney region. Terrified, some survivors flee from the epidemic and carry the disease further, where it makes its remorseless journey from clan to clan.
This is all my country. And I country. When our little fella, plenty black fella, plenty gin, plenty pickaninny, great corroboree, plenty fight. Hey, all gone now. All gone. Only me left to walk about. Maru. Gamagal Nation.
Bennelong survives. On the 25th of November, 1789, a boat sets out from the British camp towards him and the remnants of his people with the intention of capturing them.
The two poor devils were seized and handed into the boat in an instant. The noise of the men, crying and screaming of the women and children, together with the situation of the two miserable wretches in our possession, was really a most distressing scene. It was by far the most unpleasant service I was ever ordered to execute. William Brent, First Lieutenant.
Bennelong is one of two men abducted and taken, bound in ropes, to Government House to meet Philip.
He believed it was essential to establish some communication with these people who fled before him. Therefore, he did what other imperialists have done before him. He thought he'd kidnap someone. So he would then have an interpreter and someone who could explain to his own people Philip's benevolent intention.
The poor fellows, I'm told, exhibited the strongest marks of terror and consternation, believing they were certainly meant to be sacrificed.
He starts to bring Aboriginal people in this case, coercively, as if they're prisoners, to be there at his convenience, rather than him going to them and involving them in a process of change. For Philip, change was to be imposed.
When they were taken to the governor's house and immediately cleaned and clothed, their astonishment at everything they saw was amazing. A new world was unfolded to their view at once. Elizabeth MacArthur, settler.
Despite being locked up, Bennelong is dressed in specially created silk suits. His charms quickly engage Government House society, and he entertains his captors by imitating them and toasting the king.
He quickly threw off all reserve. His powers of mind were certainly far above mediocrity. He acquired knowledge both of our manners and language. He winningly communicated information, sang, danced and capered, told us all the customs of his country and all the details of his family economy. They are universally fearful of spirits. They call a spirit morn. They often scruple to approach a corpse, saying that the morn will seize them and that it fastens upon them in the night when asleep. When asked where their deceased friends are, they always point to the skies.
Bennelong finds common ground in more earthly practices, explaining that Benelli means to kiss, which of course the first Australians also like to do.
I think they were both strategically learning as much about each other as they possibly could.
I think they needed each other, but Philip needed Bennelong more than Bennelong needed Philip, for sure.
In fact, Philip and Bennelong developed a surprisingly intimate and touching relationship. He calls Philip Bayana, father, and Philip calls him son. Because something we have to remember is that the smallpox has gone through. You know, the old rules have been damaged. How do you keep the old shapes of authority after that terrible decimation?
Bennelong was meant to be a mediator between the clans and between government and the colonists, but I don't think it worked out that way.
In April 1790, the shackle is removed from Bennelong's leg. At 2 a.m. on the morning of the 3rd of May, Bennelong wakes his guard and tells him he is sick. The unsuspecting guard opens the door to let him out, but once outside, Bennelong strips off his English clothes and leaps the painted fence to freedom, disappearing into the night. Philip is in despair.
Our native has left us, and that at a time when he appeared to be happy and contented. This too is unlucky, as we have all the ceremony to go over again with another. I think that man's leaving us proved that nothing will make these people amends for the loss of their liberty. Arthur Phillip, Governor.
Philip sends his men to bring him back, and when the officers call from their boats for Bennelong, the women laugh and mimic them. He has returned to his former way of life. Bennelong avoids Philip for several months, until the 7th of September 1790, when Philip discovers the first Australians are at a whale feast, and that Bennelong is amongst them.
As Governor Philip had always been desirous of meeting with this man, and had sought an opportunity from the day he left his house, he went to the spot where he had been seen.
Philip is absolutely determined to establish friendly contact again. He needs it, he wants it, and he also feels it.
Bennelong entices Philip into a circle of warriors. Captain Hunter illustrates the moment in his sketchbook as Philip is surrounded on the beach. Bennelong introduces Philip to a Karaji, a clever man.
Philip thinks he's being asked to make friends with the other warrior, so he puts down his arms and walks towards him with his hands out.
The native, stepping back with his right leg, threw the spear with great violence, and it struck against Governor Philip's collarbone, which it entered, and the barb came out close to the third vertebrae of the back. The behavior of Bennelong could not be accounted for. He never attempted to interfere when the man took the spear up, or said a single word to prevent him from throwing it.
A bewildered Philip has been punished in a ritual known as payback. Whatever Bennelong and his people saw Philip's crime to be, Philip is wounded and the score is settled.
The spearing of Governor Philip suggested that where he was speared, where it got him, that was payback. So in fact it's a harsh way to say it, but they're trying to tell him that they liked him.
If they had intended to kill him, they would have killed him. They merely wounded him. And I think certainly it was a sign that they wanted Philip to be aware that he shouldn't cross the line. He shouldn't go too far with his own capacity to exact blood.
He absolutely prohibited any vengeance at all being taken. You know, he didn't know just what had happened, what the mechanisms of it were, because he didn't know anything like enough about Aboriginal political culture. But he knew enough to have a sense that this had been a formalised occasion and that somehow he'd muffed his lines.
Philip tries to woo Bennelong back to Government House, but Bennelong plays hard to get. A month passes before Bennelong finally concedes to Philip's pleas. Bennelong and his wife are greeted like celebrities on their return.
On hearing of their arrival, such numbers flocked to see them. When we reached the governor's house, Bennelong expressed honest joy to see his old friend and appeared pleased that he had recovered of his wound. Bennelong seemed to consider himself quite at home, running from room to room with his companions and introducing them to his old friends, particularly the governor's orderly sergeant, whom he kissed with great affection. What vintage?
turning point in relations, and now the first Australians, taking Bennelong's lead, flock into the settlement. They visit the governors and walk the streets of Sydney town, and many move in with the settlers.
They were frequently visited by many of the natives, some of whom daily came to the barracks. All of them were very fond of bread, and they now found the advantage of coming amongst the settlers. Arthur Phillip, Governor.
Of the many Europeans who are fascinated with the first Australians, Lieutenant Dawes becomes one of the most familiar. In his out-of-the-way observatory, he meets the first Australians on their own terms.
Không nghe. Không nghe nữa.
Xem cũng hay thật nhưng mà tự nhiên đang xem